Thank you for joining us today. Today is 1 September, and our goal today is to complete our Module 1 concept review. I just saw this screen that said, oops, something is wrong with VirtualBox. So page 30, you'll notice as a part of our concept review for Module 1, we want to review the specifics later in the textbook reading assignment through page 30. That's part of the way into chapter 3 here. And we want to make sure that, that some of these core concepts are firmly established. So essentially, being able to work with virtual machines has been a revolution. You'll notice here, I'm multitasking, recording a Zoom session, and yet I'm also running a second computer system as a virtual machine. And I have a great deal more control over the virtual environment than I would an actual physical environment, with the possible exception of yanking the power cord out of the wall. It is important to prepare the hardware platform for use before you implement your virtual machines. That's just part of the assignment for the assignment series. So we've asked you to go ahead and do some things to share with us what your system capacity is and what state it's in, and then to work some basic preps to make sure you can get the most out of it. A disk and memory and CPU resources are critically important. You want to have a system that has a certain basic CPU processor capacity, primarily the number of cores in your CPU, whether that's a PC or a laptop. And we also want you to clean up and defragment the disk space, because there are huge portions of your disk that are referenced when you load a virtual machine. There are methods to double or triple the performance of your laptop that involve some additional configuration measures. One is to configure the virtual memory or swap file space in your operating system, but it's something you can only do after you run updates for all applications and the operating system. It's something you can do only after you run a disk cleanup for Windows. And you'll see here that in cases where that's never been performed before, there's actually a second tab that's missing from the disk cleanup option. If you click Cleanup System Files, you'll select the second option on the magic tab or hidden tab that appears. It's called More Options. So you click Cleanup System Files and a More Options tab will appear. There's a second option lower about removing previous versions of the operating system and recovery images and so on. You want to delete those files. If you don't do this before you perform the final steps to double or triple your PC or laptop performance, and I'm sincerely hoping I have your attention now that I've mentioned this, you may wonder whether or not what you're doing has any real benefit. Well, if you did it faithfully and you took care to follow all the steps, you're in a good place to engage those additional measures to enhance laptop or PC performance. And again, doubling and tripling your performance is not uncommon. Moving right along, we just want to remind you about the core ideas about the different types of hypervisor environments. But whether it's a type 1 or a type 2 hypervisor, in either case, you have a physical host. You have a hypervisor that sits between the physical system and the virtual systems. Virtual systems are referred to as guests, right? And then there's a type 1 and type 2 hypervisor, where a type 1 sits directly on the hardware and there's no operating system It's a direct flight between the hardware, the hypervisor, and the virtual machines. So there'd be no operating system. This would be a type 1 hypervisor. And a type 2 hypervisor, like VirtualBox, you have a physical host, then you have an operating system like Windows 10 or Mac OS or Linux. And then the hypervisor, VirtualBox or VMware, runs on top of the operating system just as any other application does. And then above that layer are the guest machines. This is an example of how virtualization has revolutionized data centers for large companies like Google and Amazon and Apple. You have all of these virtual server hosts. Well, you have virtual machine hosts. These are actual physical machine hosts in a data center. These are stitched together to create a virtualization layer, and it's this shared hardware resources between servers in a data center and those primary components, right, that allow a data center to provision many virtual machines. And if one of the physical systems dies, there are other physical systems that keep going. So it's possible for each of these virtual machines to keep running even slower. We talked about the advantages of virtualization, and that's one of the criteria for this module. You have to know student learning objective for this module. So I want you to know about this. We espoused previously the benefits of VirtualBox as a type 2 hypervisor because it allows you to do Windows, it allows you to do Linux, and it allows you to work with Macs. It's one of the few that runs on any platform. There's even a version that runs on Unix. What you see here is the difference. This might be a little hard to see. Can everybody see?
Kinda. Yeah.
Yeah, I can make out the type 1, type 2.
Yeah.
Type 1 is often referred to as a bare metal hypervisor. So the hardware, the bare metal of the machine, loads the hypervisor, the virtualization software. So VMware ESXi is a great example. VMware is a commercial product, but they also have a desktop product that's a type 2, where you're running Windows or a Mac. And so you have that Windows or Mac OS, and then you have VMware Workstation, the client, and it creates guest machines here. So the VMware Workstation is much like VirtualBox. The industrial strength corporate product is the type 1. Any questions?
This might be slightly off topic, but when we're talking about these virtual machines, I don't know, like I'm sure you know about this already. NFTs, are these what are the servers that host those NFTs or whatever? Is that like a virtual machine kind of thing going on there?
Servers that host MFTs.
NFTs.
NFTs. Is NFT, can you explain more about that? I want to be sure I'm thinking about the acronym you're talking about. What is
The
NFT?
non-fungible token, you know, those images that people buy, I guess. I don't know, it's kind of crazy. But is that like what's going on there? Like those images are like stored on the server, and then like you have the hypervisor, and then you have them, you're virtually hooking up to it, I guess, and getting the image. Is that what's going on?
Well, okay, so NFT, I think you're talking about things like cryptocurrency.
Yes, that's what I do mean, yeah.
Right. So cryptocurrency is an abstraction of physical currency. And there are virtualized aspects of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and other virtual economic systems. So to answer your question, the trend to virtualize is pervasive. And there's even a way to virtualize an application so that it runs on any kind of OS and any kind of platform, and it's called containerized apps. And what you're talking about is a digital and encrypted component of a cryptocurrency system, and they tend to be kind of complex, and there's more than one flavor of them. So I'm going to attempt to answer your question in broad terms. Your question about NFT is a good one because it speaks to the industry-wide trend to create virtual manifestations of physical things in our world. That's the trend, right? So you don't need operating systems, you don't need platforms. With containerized apps, you just need to create something with Kubernetes or with Docker, and it'll run on anything. So we're taking an application that we might need to perform our business services to pay the bills, right? So you have a business and you need application software to improve the efficiency and the reliability and the security of your business process. And you don't want to be a technical person. You just want an app that you can pull up on any client, any smartphone, any tablet, anything, right? Your smart screen TV. You can browse the web with your smart TV and then pull it up, and there it is. So to answer your question, it's similar to, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the focus or interest of this course, which is building the virtual machines.
Okay.
Yes. Now, when we build the virtual machines, then those virtual machines are capable of being used for virtualized components of a cryptocurrency system, certainly. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Now, one cool option is that you can take an entire operating system, install it with a USB pen drive or thumb drive, and then if you boot from a USB port, you can actually create a virtual instance of an operating system that's temporary, and the actual hard disk in a physical system is never used. This is the kind of stuff that we do when we're working in cybersecurity forensic interests. So that's just to share yet another example of the virtualization trend, right? Any questions before we dive into the textbook? So in previous classes, we've reviewed setting up VirtualBox and getting started, and that's pretty much what your textbook does. The textbook is going to look and feel a little different than what we have in the module inside our Blackboard module. So if I scare up our Blackboard module quickly here, the sequence of tasks and assignments is going to parallel and closely resemble what's in your textbook. And so what's happened for some students in our course is that when you click into here and then look at the different assignments and solution, and here they are inside here, these parallel and supplement what's in your textbook. So you can jump into your, what am I saying? You can jump into your textbook and certainly create a virtual machine. And here we're on page 21 of the section you're supposed to read. And some students have done this, but what may happen is that there are differences in the version. There are differences in the screens that are shown. More importantly, if you just jump into it and you don't perform the preps on your hardware host, your laptop or your PC, there are a lot of things that just fly off the rails, right? And I think there is some mention of enabling virtual support in your BIOS somewhere in the textbook, but if that's not explicitly stated in our textbook, then it's explicitly stated in our study guide, right? And in the assignments. So one of the stumbling blocks is enabling the virtual features in your BIOS setting. And this was posted over the weekend, by the way. So you're going to take what you did in 1.3 here, and then you're going to follow the steps that are outlined. And so if you just click this link, you'll find that there's plenty in here that kind of guides you along. Full disclosure, I'm going to ask you to show where your license key is entered, the activation key, in the third step. And I want you to show it inside your virtual machine, and I also want you to show it in a text window. And I want you to capture that screen as part of your submission for step 3. And the reason I want you to do that is because the license key in step 3 that's used to create and build your virtual machine should match what you downloaded here from the Microsoft downloads, right? And you only get to use it once. And we're installing the standard version of the software. And so when you watch this video, you'll notice that I'm not showing my key. If I build a YouTube video here with this short step-by-step video, and I put it out on YouTube and it shows my activation key, there will be hackers in Romania and Brazil and North Korea that will be using my license key with a bootleg copy of the ISO to try to have free server software. So that's one thing I wanted to share with you about this. You have to do this first before you can complete this. The BIOS setting is often referred to as the startup settings of a computer. So if your system is powered off completely, and when I say powered off completely, I mean, yeah, the battery's removed from your laptop or the plug is out of the wall for your PC. When you power it on, the first thing you should see is some kind of logo, a brand logo, like ASUS or Lenovo or IBM or Apple or HP or Dell. Take your pick, right? And as that logo is displaying on the screen, there's a key press. Everybody's key press is different. But a lot of times it's F1 or it's the delete key or it's the F12 key. And if you go in there and you find the system configuration menu, the virtualization settings you see here can be enabled. That's one stumbling block for people setting up their virtual machine. In Lenovo's, they embed those features in the security menu instead of the configuration menu. And one important thing you have to do is make sure that you press F10 to save and exit in order to do that. Now, I've been mentioning this in each and every class repeatedly because there's a little bit of confusion about that. But in any case, I wanted to make sure everybody was clear on what's required. Now, we want you to basically log into your new virtual machine and then capture a screen showing your login. You have the start menu and you hold your mouse over the account icon. So what I'm saying is you do this inside your virtual machine. So when you hit the start menu and you slide up, it's going to display the name. It'll show administrator right there. And here's a helpful tip when you're trying to capture the contents of your virtual machine. And I'll go ahead and start mine. Oh, that's right. Mine was rebooting because I was running updates, and then it said, don't shut this down. And I had to leave. So it said, hey, don't shut this down. Don't turn it off. It's posting updates. And when I went to turn off my machine, I used an option to save the system state. So as I start this up, it's going to resume right where it left off. And instead of scrambling the eggs, because on a physical machine, if I had powered it off, I could have, scrambled some disk sectors or caused some problems. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate what you do when you come back. So contrary to the best advice, this is what's displaying on the preview. It says, hey, don't turn this system off, but I didn't have a choice. So when I went to power off the system using the VirtualBox Manager option to do that, it said, well, do you want to save the system state? So it's taken a snapshot of where that is as it's shutting down to reload the updates. And I'm going to start with I did explain detachable, right? Does anyone recall the mention of the detachable start as opposed to just a regular normal start? So
in the video that you had posted, you talked about it. I'm not sure if you talked about it in class though.
Right. Okay, thank you. So if you just click start, it's going to start normal. But if you're on a laptop and there are power save settings, you want to make sure that you use detachable start. And I'm going to do that now. And it's going to create, it's going to restore where I was with that virtual machine while it was in the process of applying the updates where it said, hey, don't mess with this. I don't see the window, so it's kind of thinking about it. I can double click this thing and I should get a window that shows, oh, okay, it's still starting the virtual machine. It's still reloading. So the snapshot includes the content of the active memory, the temporary files on the disk space, what's going on in the background. It literally does a freeze frame. And now you see, yes, now you see I've literally resumed exactly where I was before I had to power off my machine. So what am I saying? I did this and it said, oh, you're trying to close your virtual machine? Do you want to continue running in the background, save the machine state, send the shutdown signal, power off the machine? Well, it's supposed to be getting my Windows ready. It says, don't turn off the computer. And for some crazy reason, it's taking a little longer. That could be because I'm broadcasting a Zoom session, capturing a recording, juggling other windows like my Outlook, right? So all of these things will slow down your performance. And this is one thing I want to demonstrate to you. Your mileage may vary. If you're running fewer apps, your VM performance will run more quickly. Any questions? I'm going to let this run in the background. And then while this is running in the background and clearing in the background, we're going to cover the material in the textbook. Any questions before we start? So why is this doing it again? It's because I performed the steps for the extra credit. In this assignment, you did things to clean up the disk and optimize the technology so that your hardware is better. And if you repeat those same things, essentially, you perform system updates, then you perform a disk cleanup, then you perform a disk defrag in your virtual machine. It's going to start and load a lot faster and run with greater reliability. Okay. And do you have to do that? So go ahead.
So do those things that you did to optimize the hardware, the laptop that I'm using, do that on the virtual machine?
Yes.
Okay.
And that tunes the performance. And when you do that, okay, a lot of students roll their eyes and they're like, really, I got to do this again? And I'm like, yeah, it's a good practice. It's a best practice. And I'm going to throw the gauntlet down and say, I'm even willing to post additional credit for this solution. Your 1.3 assignment is worth 2 points, and the solution is 3 points. The VM setup is 3 points, and that's 5 points together for the hands-on part, right? Then we have an assessment. I'm going to post an assessment before the end of this week. You'll have your first attempt at the online assessment. You'll see it at the top of this screen. It'll say 1.5 assessment, 5 points, virtual machine basics, right? And you'll have until our class next week, you'll have like 45 minutes. There'll be between 20 and 25 questions, and it'll be your first attempt. What's on the assessment? Well, everything we did in the assignments, the content we reviewed, the concepts we reviewed in class, the material in your study guide and in your textbook, right? So doing this extra step means you're logging additional credit. If you make a habit of working the additional credit for each of the solutions in our modules, and there will be 4 modules, so you'll have 4 modules to do at your own pace for the most part, 2 to 3 weeks for each module. There will be a midterm exam and a final exam, and basically if you log the additional credit each time for each module, the odds are pretty good. You don't really have to worry about either the midterm or the final. You could bank enough credit where you just, I tell you what your average is, and you plan some other activity during the exam week. Now, in your My Grades part, you're going to see a total points, earned points kind of listed on the screen when you click into My Grades. And what you should see is, okay, here's the points I've logged to this point. Here's the total points possible. I take the points earned, divide by the points possible. We'll do that and demonstrate that at a later time. I haven't scored each of the submissions yet. Some of you are still working through the earlier assignments. If you need more time to finish by the end of this week, I don't have any problem extending the deadline for the assignments through the end of this week. But it is a holiday weekend, and I don't want to throw a bunch of extra stuff out there. This should be easy to finish before the end of the week. And if it isn't, I want you to give me a heads up. Okay. So,
Quick question.
yes.
For step 1 of assignment 1.4, is the picture of the BIOS, and right here it says capture a screenshot to show this is complete and save this as a JPEG. Is that particular, are those 2 separate pictures, the BIOS picture and then that other picture that says that that I've ran and updated the virtual machine extension pack, that I've installed it?
Let me see. So you probably take this picture of your BIOS screen with your smartphone.
Yes, I did that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you wouldn't be able to do it with a print screen option. So it says, okay, download the VirtualBox and extensions, then load these on your system, and then capture a screenshot to show this is complete, right? To answer your question, yeah, actually, there would be one other screen capture, and that's a really insightful question. Thank you for asking that.
Okay.
One thing you can do is paste your BIOS image into a Word document, and then hit enter, and then paste your VirtualBox and extensions install underneath it, and then save it as a JPEG. And so you could say, your name and then step 1.pdf, or you're not saving it as a JPEG, you're saving it as a PDF. Another thing is that you could say step 1A BIOS, right? Step 1B VirtualBox. So I probably need to revise that, and I will. If you send me an email, I'll post additional credit because you pulled that out in class, and that's a really good point, and I should have articulated a little different process here. So thank you for bringing that up. Everything else should be pretty straightforward. So that's kind of what we did down here in steps 3A and 3B. Okay. Any other questions?
Dr. Kenta, can't I technically just go into system information and then take the screenshot of the virtualization being on in the system information screen?
If the system information screen shows that criteria and its status, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Not everybody has that capacity or capability. And I would say that's a pretty cool feature. And what brand of system do you have? Because I should probably look at it.
Windows should do it. I think all Windows should be able to do it. Is just you search up in the search bar at the bottom of the screen, you just put in MS info, and then you see system information, you click it, and then you scroll down. Oh, yeah, MS info.
Well, MS Info in previous versions of Windows didn't include things like whether or not the virtualization was enabled.
Because I still have Windows 10, so if you scroll down to the bottom, it should be there. Yeah, see?
So
Hyper-V.
virtualization-based security is not enabled.
And then Hyper-V virtualization enabled.
Yeah, that's Hyper-V because I've turned on Hyper-V. So Hyper-V is if you have an edition of Windows like Server or Education, Windows 10 Pro Edition, Windows 10 Education Edition, you have the ability to, and I do, I have a Professional Edition on here, and then there are Education Editions. You can turn on Windows features, which include a built-in capacity to run virtual machines. It's called Hyper-V. And if I select this box, it installs the components for Windows, Microsoft's own version of VirtualBox or VMware Workstation. It's called Hyper-V. That is not the same.
Oh, okay.
That's not the same as virtualization support. That has more to do with whether or not the Hyper-V element is in the mix. But it could be, I'll take a look. And the short answer is, I don't recall a specific reference to virtualization and this stuff is changing all the time, but the reference here, AMD has something, they have a different label, but this has to do with the ability to virtualize digital and hardware components connected to the motherboard or integrated with the motherboard. That's enabled, and the ability to support virtual machines is enabled. So those are two different aspects of the hardware that you want to make sure are enabled. So you want to be able to virtualize the devices, and you want to create whole virtual machines, or you want to be able to support the creation of whole virtual machines, right? So a VMM, a virtual machine manager, that's VirtualBox or VMware, right? And I'll take a closer look at this, okay? So glad you brought that up. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Let's look at Chapter 3, our VirtualBox interface. Now, there are occasions where you're going to have a machine and it's not going to shut down properly. Did mine shut down eventually? It finally shut down. Oh, it finally powered off. I had to wait long enough. Now, I want you to notice, you know, I basically let it run undisturbed. I was at the point where I was ready to force a power off. And there are differences between saving the state, putting it to sleep, issuing an ACPI shutdown command, and then powering it off is like yanking the cord out of the wall. So it literally just cuts it off, and that can be very bad. That's what Chapter 3 is about. It's about working your way around the interface to maximize the, can everybody still see? I should probably go a little larger there. So the manager interface, they're talking about this interface. When I start the machine, there is a separate layer of menus. You have machine menus and you have the VM manager menus. So the VirtualBox management environment, I can run more than one virtual machine. So this is the VMM menu options, and then here embedded for each virtual machine is a second set of machine specific menus. That is one of the most important distinctions that creates confusion that's worth pointing out. Does everybody understand that you have different menus? When I say go to the machine menus, I'm talking about the menus inside the running machine, as opposed to go to the VMM, go to the VirtualBox menus. I'm talking about these things, okay? This is one thing that's not so obvious, right? So these three little dots, when you click this, it'll give you a view of the logs. It'll give you a view of the snapshots. So as a virtual machine is running, you can take snapshots of the machine as it's running. It takes up a lot of disk space, a lot of memory. I'm going to tell you this. If you're not careful about using this and you have limited disk space and you take snapshots of things, you can basically go forward and back in time to the different states. So if you blow something up, you can just reverse the timeline and go back to something that was stable before you took action and blew it up. The only problem with snapshots is that you're capturing huge chunks of data representing each virtual machine state. And right now I haven't done any of that. That's another topic for another time. I'll go back. If I have problems, it'll talk about how, you know, we had issues. So if you're trying to troubleshoot why something hangs or blows up, that's a useful feature. And the details option, though, is where we're normally going to see most everything. Here for the components, the virtual components of the hardware, and then a preview of what the screen looks like. We do not have to load the VirtualBox Manager at all in order to be able to run a virtual machine. To prove that, I'm going to close this. Okay, so I'm not even running that anymore. I'm going to close this too. So I'll close this window and I'll close, what else am I going to close? I'll close my Outlook. I'm going to close my Paint. Do I have 4? Yeah, I have 5. Okay, cool. So one of the most profound things we want you to learn up front is the view option. Now, depending on your physical hardware, also for input, under devices, you're going to insert the guest edition CD image. This is where the extensions media is implemented. One of the first things you should do is use the input key, run Control-Alt-Delete, go ahead and log into your virtual machine. And yes, certainly run system updates and then do disk cleanup and disk defrag. But part of setting up your initial machine also is to insert the guest edition CD image. Now, when you do this, it's gonna insert a disk image, much like a plastic disk and a DVD drive. And by the way, when you start server, that splash screen you land into is called the dashboard. You can minimize that. And if you want to see specifics about your local server, you can configure with ease this way, but you can also get a read on what the local server is doing, whether its firewall is, and it'll populate all the entries here. You see my computer name is a provided computer name. It's gibberish, right? But in a minute, all of these entries will populate and you'll see what network address I'm on, whether remote desktop is enabled, what time zone I'm in, whether my software is activated. The last time I updated my stuff, that's specific to server. That's specific to Microsoft Server environment. But this is the part you should click on. You want to open this and click on that so that it opens. Everybody can see my screen, right?
Yep, I can see it.
And what you'll see is that it's literally like a CD disk, and you're going to find the 64-bit version of the VBox Windows editions. And it should auto run. I mean, when you insert it, it should auto run. For server operating systems, there are times where it does not allow auto run capabilities. But what I want to do is select this as soon as I get a screen that's working, and I want to right click it and run it as administrator. I don't want to use the x86 because that's 16-bit. I want to use the AMD 64 because that's the 64-bit version, and I have the 64-bit version of the OS loaded. Okay, so I'm going to run as administrator. If it doesn't load automatically, that's what I'm going to do to load it. I'll accept the default settings, and that's going to give me much better capacity to utilize my viewing options so I can go full screen. There's something called Unity mode, where I'll just click the next and install. It'll do this. It might even say, hey, you need to reboot your system in order for this to take effect. This accommodates the differences in your specific hardware components on the host, and it allows VirtualBox to more cleanly and in a more stable, reliable manner virtualize the components. There you see the display is flashing. That's normal. So the display driver was enhanced. The input output for keyboard and mouse will be enhanced. The network drivers will be enhanced. It says, hey, if you want this to work right, reboot now. I'm going to say finish. And it's going to reboot my system. Now, it's not uncommon after you install something to do what? Run system updates again, run disk cleanup again, run disk defrag again. It goes much faster if you just keep doing that as a habit. So, but let's keep going. If you have the VirtualBox extensions loaded by inserting that disk, so it's a two-step process. You have to install the extensions, but then you have to insert the disk. Inside here, you can set preferences. We've already done that. We've set up a VM directory. You can export a VM so that it's an appliance, meaning the same thing. It's like a photocopy machine for a VM. You can check for updates on the VirtualBox Manager, and that's good to do. Let's see. So essentially, your textbook walks through some very easy to understand descriptions, and the log viewer, right? That same view of the log can be had by going into your the option I showed you where you click in the VM. That's not running now, so I have to load it. If I do this, and then I do this, and I go to logs, I can show my logs, right? So that's something they already showed you. Here's the part I want you to get, and this is huge. Everybody needs to take just a moment. We're almost done. We're within 60 seconds of ending the thing. All right, so there's useful stuff off the help menu, yada, 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 right? Yeah, that's it. So the view option. Once your editions CD is installed, this view menu is much more functional. You can run your virtual machine full mode, but if you go full mode, it's going to have a pop-up that says you have to press the host key plus the letter F to go to full screen. Well, if you want to go back to scaled mode, like we're in scaled mode, or you want to be able to adjust the window size, so you can stretch it out or shrink it down and it'll automatically adjust the size. You can press the host key and the letter A, or the letter F for A for adjust, F for full screen. Now, here's the catch. The host key is usually defined as the right CTRL key or the left CTRL key. Your mileage may vary. So what am I saying? Let's say I switch to scaled mode. It's going to say, oh, it's your right control key. Now, it's different for everybody, but you have to remember that when they refer to the host key, they're talking about the one of two CTRL keys in the lower corners, left and right side of your keyboard. Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yep, gotcha.
So
Yes.
if we go to scaled mode and I want to go back, this is the important part. This freaks people out. You're running a virtual machine, you go full screen, you can't go back. You can't get to your desktop on your host machine. And everybody freaks out. I'm like, okay, let's take a breath. It's not that bad. Right, let's take a breath. So what do? Well, you remember it's the host and home key. So let's see how this works. I'm going to press my right control key and my C key for scaled and see if the screen changes. No, it doesn't really change. If I press my right control key and the home key, it goes back. Oh, but I haven't switched. Now, does that work? Is that better or worse?
Better.
Well, it's better if you have a very good display. Is that better or worse?
No, that's definitely worse. It's not
Yeah,
functioning
sure.
properly.
Let's say I want to go back. I'm going to press my right control key with the home key. Right? So if I click on this and I press this, the view, I should be able to go back to full screen mode. Oh, this is what I'm talking about. You can still see the screen, right? Sometimes your mouse cannot access the view option. And more to the point, when you go inside server, you can change the screen resolution inside server and it'll take up more of this. So it's important to understand you got to be able to access your extra options. I'm going to go back to scaled mode. And then I'll log in and change the display so that it's like 1440 by 900. So it's widescreen like my laptop. All of that depends on running the guest edition CD. Okay. All right. That's the last part of our class. I hope you have a pleasant and safe Labor Day weekend. If you have any issues or difficulties finishing up the last part of your solution, please give me a shout by text or by email. I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording.